Still ahead here on Today, a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist named Connie Schultz is going to be explaining to us why life happens.
Good thing.
Also, why cooking clubs make friendships more than just potluck.
That's
all the rage.
That's right. That's after these messages in your local news.
Following her dream to become a writer, Connie Schultz put pen to paper and became a columnist for the Cleveland Plain Dealer at the age of 45, and then went on to win the Pulitzer Prize just 2 years later. Now she has compiled her collection of columns in a new book called Life Happens and Other Unavoidable Truths. Connie, good morning.
Thanks for having me here.
What an inspiration, this idea that someone could start so late in life. Not that 45 is ancient, but
it ain't young.
It ain't young, and you started, you had kids, you actually didn't get your first job until you were, what, 36?
I was 36 when I took my first newspaper job, which was at the Plain Dealer, and I'd been a freelance writer for a lot of years before that.
And in fact, you stayed in your writing with the idea of writing through the voice of a working class person. You stayed connected, and so much of what you write about is giving voice to people who are, as you say, aren't stunned by the bright light of fame
somebody
and
else.
Right.
Well, you know, part of that, I really don't think I was even aware of how much I was working through my own working class roots as I wrote. I just gravitated toward issues of hourly wage earners, of people who, you know, I'm a feminist, so women who didn't have a voice, or workers who didn't have a voice. But as I got older, especially when I became a columnist as opposed to being a reporter, I really saw myself come full circle back to my roots, particularly to my father, who had been a union activist, who had been such a hard worker all his life, and had never lost his courage, I think, in terms of advocating for other people.
He actually passed away just last
week. Yeah, it was really hard. He had a heart attack on Tuesday, and quite frankly, he never came back. And Thursday, we finally took him off life support. But what was so rewarding for me is that he got to see the book. And I introduced him at 2 events in my hometown of Ashtabula, Ohio. Both of them were very working class groups, there, a lot of labor workers there. And I got to stand up and make my dad stand up and say, this is the man who raised me, this is the man. The only reason I have this Pulitzer that you all are cheering now is because this man gave everything he had and wore his body out so that I would never have to. And he could not believe the look on his face and the way his eyes just shined. He could not believe people. I mean, they were just clapping. They were hooting and hollering.
Because he represented them.
Well, and
he represents
that's exactly
the heroism in all people.
And I was their dream.
Who are unnamed.
I was their dream for their kids. They all have the same dream for their kids. And I asked my dad, I told him, a lot of people are coming up to me at book signings, because I wrote a lot about my dad in this book. And I said, they're talking about you, and I'm wondering how you feel about that, because I was pretty candid about his life. And you know what he said? He said, well, I guess if people, knowing what I did and knowing how hard it was for me, if that helps them, then maybe what I did mattered. Maybe it really mattered. And I had to walk away. I teared up when he said that. But it was the first time I ever saw my father proud of what he had done for a living. And I'm so glad he got to see that before he died.
And in this book, and in fact, you have, you wrote about his passing, and I think if you don't mind reading that, or do you think you can?
It's what writers do, you know. I'm on a leave of absence actually right now from the Plain Dealer while my husband runs for the Senate, but they called me and asked if I'd write this. And because my editor, Stuart Warner, knows me so well, he knew this was how I would cope anyway. So here's the paragraph I was asked to read. There were moments during the vigil by my father's bed when I felt I was watching a whole way of life coming to an end. He was a working stiff, a manual laborer who always thought he was a nobody, but believed he could raise his kids to be somebodies. With a union job and too many nights of time and a half, he pulled it off. There we were, his somebodies, 4 college graduates with far easier lives, tending to his every final need.
Heroism from him, and the love that came back to him at the end. He did so well in you. He must have been so proud of you. And because your writing is singularly beautiful, it has a kind of fresh realism. And you've never, and in fact, you have said that you stay in that as a tribute to him. You also, as you mentioned, are married to a man who's now running for the U.S. Senate. And he, Sherrod Brown, he's a congressman now from Ohio.
Right.
He, because of his being a politician, that creates a particular problem for you, I would think, as a news writer.
Well, I made the decision, and I did make it on my own, that it was becoming too difficult to work at Ohio's largest newspaper that was also covering my husband's Senate race. And I could argue till I'm blue in the face that I have these opinions and they're all on my own. As my dad said when I first got my column, I called and said, Dad, I'm finally going to be a columnist. And he said, great, at 45 you're finally going to get paid for what you've been thrown around for free for 45 years. So nobody who knew me was surprised I could be a columnist, but it just got too complicated. And I also wanted to really be a wife to my husband. This is a very important race for Ohio, and we both decided that we were risking getting too comfortable. And I mean, it's a great job to be a columnist, great job to be a congressman.
Are you going to come back to that, or you're not going to come
That's
back
my plan. Yeah, that's definitely my plan. I've also signed with Random House to do a book on this Senate race. So I'll have a place to put it all as life unfolds in front of me.
Because that's actually something that it seems to me that you need.
Yeah.
And certainly we need to hear from your columns, especially in this book, Life
Thank
Happens,
you.
and Other Unavoidable Truths. Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Connie
Ann.
Schultz. A pleasure to speak to you, especially now. And we'll have an excerpt from this book on our website at today.msnbc.com.